thick fibers are collagen fibers. These thinner, dark staining fibers here are elastic fibers. A real or connective tissue contains all three types of fibers. It also contains reticular fibers, but they're not picking up the stain. They're very thin. We said that elastic fibers can form lamina. So these are kind of wavy sheets that are extending throughout the tissue. So we call these not just elastic fibers, we call these elastic lamina. Reticular fibers require a special stain. So here's a silver stain that's coloring the elastic fibers black. Okay? But sometimes the tissue will appear a vivid blue or purple. Okay, but it's not going to look like an H&E stain from that standpoint. Okay. Reticular fibers are found mostly in lymphoid organs, like lymph nodes, okay, or maybe in the spleen, bone marrow. The last component we said is ground substance. Ground substance is amorphous. It means it doesn't have a shape. It simply fills in the gaps between cells and fibers. So it's an amorphous gelatinous substance that fills in the space between cells and fibers. It provides a medium through which nutrients and gases can diffuse. Okay, so that these substances can pass into cells or out of cells. That ground substance may become mineralized, as you see with bone. In bone, the ground substance becomes embedded with calcium and phosphate and becomes hard. In fact, ground substance may have varying consistencies. It may be firm, it may be hard, and in the case of blood, liquid. Now, the ground substance, I think of it as a soup of organic molecules. So think of the ground substance as a soup of organic molecules, mainly GAGs, which stands for Glycosamine glycans. It's easier just to say GAGs. Proteoglycans and Glycoproteins. Wow. You'll learn more about these different classes of organic molecules in biochemistry. The principal organic molecule, though, is the GAG, like glycosamine glycan. GAGs are linear, unbranched, long polysaccharide chains formed by repeating subunits of disaccharides. So you have a disaccharide, that means two sugars linked together, and this pair is repeated in sequence along the polysaccharide chain. And that's what makes up a GAG, glycosamine glycan. Has anybody taken microbiology yet?
I'm currently in it.
Okay, so for instance, the cell wall of bacteria is made up in part of proteoglycan, peptidoglycan, right? Well, peptidoglycan is a GAG. It's a repeating subunit of what's called NAG and NAM. NAG is like N-acetyl-glutamic acid, and NAM is N-acetyl-uramic acid. Okay, so that's an example of a GAG. Okay, these long polysaccharides with repeating disaccharide subunits. If you would now, these GAGs possess a negative charge, and therefore they're hydrophilic. They attract water. Okay. In fact, the more water they attract, the firmer the tissue becomes. Many of them also bind with proteins to form proteoglycans. So here we see a bunch of GAGs linking up to a core protein. That's a proteoglycan. Now, the last type of organic molecule we said that's present within ground substance is glycoproteins. Glycoproteins are just globular proteins, proteins that have a three-dimensional shape to which we have a chain of sugars. Okay. Now, this is a list of some of the common gags present within connective tissue. And you may have heard of these. Hyaluronic acid, chondroitin sulfate, dermatan sulfate, heparin sulfate, paraffin sulfate. In other words, a lot of these gags are sulfonated. Okay. You find hyaluronic acid in cartilage, in synovial fluid, that's joint fluid, okay, within the skin. Chondroitin sulfate is found in both cartilage and bone. Okay? So you can find different gags in different types of tissue. This is kind of a representation of extracellular matrix. Here's the margin of the cell, here's the cell membrane, and here's the extracellular matrix. Okay? And what you can see is these are proteoglycan complexes where you have gags attached to a protein core. And this proteoglycan is connected to the cell membrane. Here within the extracellular matrix, you see collagen fibers. Okay, and you have proteoglycans connected to the collagen fibers. Fibronectin is a glycoprotein that's connected to some of these structures outside of the cell. So there are a lot of molecules. It looks fairly random, but it's actually well organized. Okay. So this begs the question. Do you understand why supplements that claim to improve the health of bones and joints include calcium, glucosamine, or chondroitin sulfate? These are all available over the counter. Okay? Why? Because they're important components of the extracellular matrix of cartilage and bone. Let's look at glucosamine, for example. Glucosamine is simply one of the components of the disaccharide that makes up hyaluronic acid. That's the major gag that's in cartilage and bone. Then chondroitin sulfate. Okay, chondroitin sulfate. Why do these supplements contain chondroitin sulfate? Well, let's look. It's a gag. That's an important component of cartilage and bone. So it's replacing these organic molecules that oftentimes are lost as tissues wear down. Okay. Let's take a break now.